Greetings, everyone. We are concerned about the number of rejections of holders of Zimbabwe exemption permits when they apply for a general work visa. Our understanding is announced on the 25th of November 2021 and the subsequent announcement by then Minister of Home Affairs Dr. Aaron Mtswaledi was that waivers have been granted to holders of Zimbabwe exemption permits for them to qualify to apply for a general work visa. The first waiver that was granted, because the law says that you cannot change the condition of your visa in South Africa. So what was required prior to the announcement was that the holders of the Zimbabwe exemption permit would have to go back to their country of origin to apply for a general work visa. When government said it was going to discontinue with the Zimbabwe exemption permits, it meant that they have to move to other visas. But that meant changing the condition of the visa in South Africa. Therefore, Cabinet then granted a waiver. That was the first waiver announced on the 25th of November 2021. That holders of Zimbabwe exemption permits will apply in South Africa without going to their countries of origin. Then the minister announced that holders of Zimbabwe exemption permits would have to apply for waivers, because initially when the announcement was made on the 25th of November 2021 that people have to move to other visas, people were now asked to check the requirements of any of the 17 visas that they wanted to apply for. People applied were rejected because they could not qualify. And the first people that applied were professionals, but whose skills are not listed under the critical skills list. For instance, someone who's a lecturer in a university teaching media studies, or someone who's a lawyer, or someone who's a teacher at a high school is a professional, but their skills are not, or their professions are not under the critical skills list. And we said the majority therefore would not qualify under those circumstances. Then the minister then announced that people have to apply for waivers instead of getting a letter from the Department of Labor, which is a requirement when one is applying for a general work visa, because one will need to get a letter from the Department of Labor, because one has to supply the Department of Labor with all the necessary information to say that the job that they are applying for has been advertised, or the job that they've been offered where they work. In the case of holders of ZEP, interviews were done, or adverts were done, flighted in public newspapers, interviews were done, all those records were required. But the waiver was that you do not need to submit all that requirement in terms of the labor certificate, in terms of proof of the interviews, that the adverts were flighted. You needed not to submit such. So that was what the minister, we understood to have said, that those requirements were not going to be needed. If you apply for a waiver, it is going to be waived. The other key requirement that was waived, which we understood was waived, was the issue of the certificate from the South African Qualifications Authority, because we had said the majority of the holders of ZEP do not qualify on the basis that they do not have the necessary qualifications as required for one to apply for a general work visa. So people were asked to submit an application for a waiver, which the minister was then going to waiver that requirement. I'm looking into all the requirements. You can Google the requirements for a general work visa. So we understood that once an application is made, that requirement for the certificate from the South African Qualifications Authority is no longer necessary, just like any other requirements. Remember also there was an issue of fingerprints. There were other requirements that because of the application for a waiver meant that those requirements were no longer applicable to a holder of Zimbabwe exemption permit. But for any other applicant who wanted to apply for a general worker visa who is not a holder of the Zimbabwe exemption permit, a person needed to meet those requirements. But what we are now getting is that people are applying for a general, for a waiver gets granted. And when a waiver is granted, we are of the belief that all these requirements are no longer required. What is only required is that the person does not have a criminal record in South Africa. A person is a holder of a Zimbabwe exemption permit. A person has a job in South Africa. Those becomes the basic requirements as we understood. But we are receiving rejection letters. The first rejection letter will say, let me quote what is written. Says, let me not the appeal, but the letter first. It says, with reference to your application for a general work visa, section 19 bracket 2, you are, in terms of the provisions of section 8 bracket 3 of the Act, hereby notified that the decision is as follows. Then it says, that's the decision. You have failed to submit proof of qualifications evaluated by the South African Qualifications Authority prescribed in regulations 8 bracket 3 bracket B of the immigration regulations of a waiver of the said requirement contemplated in section 31 bracket 2 bracket C, the Immigration Act. This then becomes the reason of rejection, right? Then we ask a person to say, did you not apply for a waiver? Person says, no, I applied for a waiver. And the waiver outcome is that these requirements were waived. So naturally, this person then appeals because they had submitted the waiver when they made their application. Then the appeal, the outcome of the appeal, then again comes, says, outcome of application for appeal submitted in terms of section 8 bracket 4 of Immigration Act 2002, then the name of the person and their reference number. It then says the appeal application submitted in terms of section 4 in section 8 bracket 4 of the Immigration Act 2002, Act number 13 of 2002. Immigration Act refers. Then 2 says, I have reconsidered the appeal application mentioned in paragraph 1 above based on the representation that accompanied the said appeal application and have decided to decline, to dismiss same for the following reasons. And again, the reason is that there is no letter or certificate from the South African Qualifications Authority. That then becomes problematic, because the essence of a waiver, as we understood it, and unless others heard it differently from us, I've been talking to some lawyers also who are assisting others to appeal, because as we understood was that having gone through these requirements, which are in front of me in my computer here, having gone through these requirements, right? Then the holder of the Zimbabwe exemption permit makes specific reference to the requirements that are here to say, this, I hereby submit an application for you to waive these requirements, which are stated, because I do not possess, I will not be able to meet these requirements for me to apply for a general work visa. That's the application for a waiver. So when a waiver comes positive, and the waiver says, I've considered your waiver application, I've decided to waiver all the requirements that you mentioned, and I clear you to appeal. I mean to apply for a general work visa or any of the visas, because the person will have made a specific reference to a general work visa, right? Then the person applies for a general work visa without submitting a certificate from the South African Qualifications Authority on the basis that it has been cleared by submitting the waiver, because the person has been granted a waiver. Then the rejection comes, says, no, we are rejecting you on the basis that you did not submit a certificate from the South African Qualifications Authority. Then the applicant appeals, attaches for the second time the waiver, and writes in the appeal to say, on such a day, I applied for a waiver and they indicated, and I made the request for you to waiver these requirements, and I therefore attach the waiver itself, where my understanding is that these requirements were removed, so therefore I was clear to apply for a general work visa. Kindly consider my appeal. Then again the appeal comes and says, no, we've looked into that, we dismiss your appeal. Now the question that you are confronted with, which the Department of Home Affairs need to clarify, is what is the purpose of a waiver, right? Because a waiver is meant to remove, which will be indicated in the application, the requirements that the applicant will not meet. But the applicant, who's a holder of ZEP, is then rejected on the basis that they do not meet the requirements as stated in the requirements for a general work visa. Please write in the comment section, like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you are on TikTok, please do follow us. Otherwise, goodbye.